welcome to your very first React tutorial. Now, question number one, what the heck is React? React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, specifically single-page applications. Now, what I was going to do is I was going to kind of tell you guys the history about React and go into a bunch of detail, show you guys a bunch of demos, but then I was like, let's just go ahead and instead of looking at demos, let's just get our hands dirty and start making them. So what do we need to get started with React? Well, the very first and probably most important thing we need is the React library. So this is the code for the library. Then this is actually made by Facebook. So if you ever go to this website and you're like, facebook.github, well, what the heck? This entire library was created by Facebook. So it's some background information. But essentially, we need these two files, react.js and react.dom.js. Now, we have a couple options of how we can include these into our HTML. What we can do is we can just go ahead and copy this and then plop them right in here, just like you include any CSS or JavaScript file. Or what you can do is you can actually download these and have them stored on your own machine. Now, the benefit of kind of just including them from here is you don't have a bunch of files on your own computer. Now, the benefit of having them on your computer is, of course, what happens whenever your internet goes out and you suddenly become in the mood to write React? Well, you can't because you're not connected and you can't get these files anymore. So if you guys want to kind of do it this way, then feel free. But my setup and what I did is I actually have them downloaded on my own system. And just to make it easier for you guys, if you go to this URL right here, and this is just my GitHub page, I already downloaded all the files as well as some additional ones that we're going to need. So I'll show you guys what to do. If you just go here, clone or download and hit download zip, then it's going to give you all the files. And once you extract it, it's going to give you this right here, all of these juicy files. So from there, what I did is I went in demos, I made a new directory called simple demo, and I made a really basic HTML file. And as you can see, I already included all the JavaScript we need, which is right in here. So you guys are looking at this and you're like, all right, so you said that we need the React DOM, JS, but what the heck is this file? You told me that we only needed these two JavaScript files, so what is this third one? Are you lying, we Bucky? Well, believe it or not, whenever we write React, even though that this is a JavaScript library, we're not going to be writing plain old JavaScript. We're going to be using a flavor of JavaScript called JSX. So why are we doing this instead of writing plain old JavaScript? Well, even though your browser needs plain old JavaScript, whenever we write JSX, we have some really cool features. For example, we can basically write this code that looks exactly like HTML. And if you guys ever try to do this with plain old JavaScript, it's a pain in the butt. So whenever we write JSX, it's just really intuitive and easy to understand and learn React. However, like I said, whenever you run this in a browser, your browser cannot understand JSX. It can only understand JavaScript. So what we need to do before we actually run it is we need a tool to convert it to plain old JavaScript. So again, this is what we're going to be writing on the left called JSX. And after we run our translator, it's actually called a transpiler, it converts it to plain old JavaScript. And you can just use a tool like this one online to do it all for you. Or you can just go ahead and include this link right here, which basically takes care of all of that behind the scenes. So we can write JSX right in here, run it, and it's going to be beautiful. Our browser is going to understand it. We're going to be able to write JSX. It's going to be awesome. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back. And in this video, now that we have everything set up, I want to go ahead and show you guys a really basic example. And the most basic example I can think of is just displaying some text on the screen. So this is going to be the dumbest React project ever, but we'll get the basics out of the way taken care of. So the way that this is going to work is whenever you make something in React, whenever you make a website or an application, you're going to use React to essentially generate some HTML. Now, usually this is going to be generated by, doing something fancy like connecting to a database or some API, like getting a list of users and then generating everyone's profile picture or username or something. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to throw some, like a heading 1 or heading 2 in there. And essentially, whenever it generates this HTML, we need somewhere to stick it. So we're going to say, all right, this is the code we're generating with React. Where are we going to put it on our website? So I'm going to go ahead and make a div. And by the way, if you're using a JetBrains IDE, if you just write div or any tag name and hit tab, then it's kind of a shortcut, fills the rest out for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this an idea of example. And all this is it's basically a target for later on whenever we write our React down here. It's going to generate a bunch of HTML, and we're going to say just stick it inside example. So it's pretty much a container, just normal HTML. So now we can actually start writing our React code. So I'm going to go ahead and make a script tag. Now by default, this is just normal JavaScript. That's what the browser is going to see. But remember, I said that we aren't going to write plain old vanilla JavaScript. What we are going to do is we're actually going to be writing something called JSX. It's a special type of JavaScript that allows us to use HTML syntax in it, and it makes it really easy to program. So what we actually need to do is we need to add an attribute right here and say text Babel. And if I say Babel, sometimes that's actually because there's a kid in my class named Andy Babel. And before I learned Babel, I don't know, that's kind of what I see in here. So again, if I say Babel, it's actually Babel. But anyways, inside here, what's going to happen is we're going to type JSX. And since we have this script, this is actually the Babel transpiler. Is basically a translator that's going to take anything in between here and translate it to normal JavaScript so our browser doesn't freak out. All right, guys. So for this example, I'm going to be showing you guys one line of code, and we'll just go ahead and run this and make sure that everything is working properly. So from React DOM, call one method called render. Now, eventually, whenever I talk to you guys about components, which are essentially just part of your website, then this is really how you use the render method. But for right now, I'll explain it like this. Basically, what render does is it takes a bit of HTML and it throws it into a target. In other words, wherever you want to display it. Now, since we really only have one place where we can target, we'll just go ahead and use this as a target. So the first parameter, again, like I said, is just some HTML. So this can be whatever, single tag that you want. I'm just going to go ahead and make a heading 1. And I'm going to go ahead and close it. And in between here, I'll just write, hi, my name is Bucky. Just like that. Actually, let me just write Bucky. Make sure I'm not running out of room. So this is our HTML. And right now, this is basically our React component. If you don't know what a component is, don't worry about it yet. So the next parameter, and the only other one it takes, is where are we going to display this? Well, we need to say this div right up here. So how do we do that? Well, if you just write document dot get elements by ID, it allows us to throw in the ID of an element, which is example. And it's going to go ahead and return a reference to this element right here. So all we're doing is we're saying, all right, take this code, which is a simple heading, and throw it into this div right there. So now if I refresh this page, check it out. Now, if I look at my source code, I don't know if you guys can see this. It might be a little bit small, but we basically have our heading 1 thrown right up into here. And of course, we can change this to a heading 2, and we can write like bacon or whatever we want. And it's going to take whatever this code is, and it's going to stick it right in between our target, as we can see right there. So that's the very basics of React. Now, again, if we didn't include this line of code right here, then watch what happens whenever we try to run this. Actually, let me print out my console. It's going to say, whoa, what the heck is this? You see, it's freaking out because this isn't actually JavaScript. This is JSX. And again, it's just a lot easier whenever we can write HTML in our JavaScript. So that's why we need to include this to translate it to regular JavaScript. So yeah, there you go. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back. And in this video, I am going to be teaching you guys about React components. Now, a component is one of the core building blocks of React. Basically, every application you make using React is going to be made up of these things called components. Now, components are actually incredibly simple to understand. components are just part of your website. That's it. That's all they are. So let me go ahead and show you guys any website. So if this was made using React, this video player, it would be a component. This progress bar, it would be a component. This button would be a component. Now, even complex things like this little text editor area at the bottom, this entire thing may be a component. Now, that brings me to another point, and that's you can actually put components together to make a bigger component. So say that all of these buttons were individual components. Well, once we put them in this little area on top and added a form below, it would make up a bigger component. So just like you can put a bunch of parts of a car together to make an entire car, that's basically what a component is, part of your website. So that's why I say in React, your entire application is going to be made up of these components, just different parts of your web page. So, sounds pretty cool. How do we make a simple component? Well, the first thing you do is go ahead and make a variable. Now, just to show you guys that you can actually name these components anything you want, I'm just going to go ahead and name mine bacon. Now, set this equal to React create class. So this is the method that you use to actually create a component. So a component is essentially just the React class. Now, since this is going to return an object, go ahead and throw curly braces in there. And inside this is where we actually make our component. Now, as you guys already guessed, since a component is just essentially part of your website, all it is pretty much HTML. So we can just have a component that's just a heading. We can have a component that's an entire body list. But for right now, essentially what your component needs to do is it needs to return some HTML. So how do we do this? We do this with a function called render. So render is a function, and all this is going to do is it's going to return some HTML. Now, whatever HTML you return, that's essentially what this component is. So let me go ahead and return something really simple, and I'll just return another, let me return like a heading 3. It always auto-completes at the wrong time, and I'll say this is a simple, and I can never spell component, C-O-M-P-O-N-E-N-T. I always spell component or something. All right, so this component is complete. All this is essentially just the heading 3. Now again, eventually we can actually add attributes to it or properties and states and have some more functions in here. But for right now, whenever we use the component bacon, it essentially just displays a heading 3. So then once we have our component made, let me tighten this up a bit so it's a little bit easier to see. We actually have to say instead of this, which was HTML we displayed before, we actually want to display our component. Now, remember I said that render basically takes a bit of HTML and displays it in your target. But what is the HTML for this component right here? Well, the HTML tag that you use is actually just the variable name. So if you go bacon, that's all you write. So whenever you see this tag bacon is basically allowing you to create custom HTML tags. So we're going to throw bacon right here, which is this component, and we're going to display it in this target right here, which is basically our only div on the website. So there you go. And actually, let me bump this up so you guys can see. For some reason, I need to refresh this twice. All right, so again, that's the basics of components. Basically, your entire application is going to be made up of these individual parts called components. Now, at the heart of a component, it essentially just returns a chunk of HTML. So in this example, we just made a component that was composed of, I don't want to say composed, made of a heading 2 tag. And then whenever we use that component, it was essentially just equal to this. So we displayed bacon in this target. Boom, roasted. There you go. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back. And in this video, I am going to show you how to render multiple components. Now, this is one of the most important rules that you need to understand whenever you make components, and that is every single component can only return one parent element. So what the heck does that mean? Well, say that you wanted to make this bacon component and you wanted to have a heading that said bacon component, and under it, you wanted to have, I don't know, like a paragraph tag or something. So you went like this, paragraph, paragraph, and all right, I am some sample text. All right, looking good. Wait a minute, why the heck are we getting a bunch of errors right here? Well, remember, like I said, right here, what we're essentially doing is we're returning two main parent elements, but we want our component to consist of both these things. So how do we get around that? Well, what we need to do is we actually need to wrap these inside a div. So if I just go div, then check this out. This allows us to use two elements inside a single component because we're only returning one parent div. So now whenever we render this, check it out. So again, just remember, whenever you make a component, make sure that you only return one parent div. If you have multiple HTML tags in here, then you need to encompass them or stick them inside one div. Now, another thing I want to mention is this. This render right here, it can only render or display essentially the same thing, one parent tag. So what happens whenever we want to display bacon 3 different times? Well, if we do this, just write the tag 3 times, you see I'm getting a bunch of errors, and whenever I try to run it, it's not going to work. So what do we need to do? Well, the same thing. And actually, let me clean this up a bit. So whenever we want to render multiple components, we just go ahead and make a main parent div. And then inside here, we can write bacon as many times as we want. Check it out. So again, that's one of the tricky things to watch out for in React. Whenever you're getting an error or something's not displaying properly and you don't know why, just know that every single component can only return one parent element. If you want your component to be made of multiple elements, then you need to wrap them inside one main parent, div, or span, or whatever you want. So there you go. I'll see you guys in the next video. Alrighty, mofos, welcome back. And in this video, I am going to show you how to use properties in React. Now, properties allow you to basically customize your components. So say that you're making this application kind of like Netflix, any application where you wanted to display movies. Well, of course, you didn't want to make a component to display movie, and then when you wanted to display another movie, you had to make a whole different component that had a different title and maybe like the main image for it. You would basically want to make the blueprint or a template for one component and customize it in a bunch of different ways. So that's what properties allow you to do. So let's actually go ahead and do that example. So I'm going to make it called movie. And remember, anytime you make a component, you just write React, create class. Make sure you got your semicolons in the right place. And all right, so we'll keep things real simple. All I'm going to do for this component is I'm just going to display a heading 1 and a heading 2. And we'll say that the heading 1 is the main title of the movie. And the heading 2 can be like the genre or a description of the movie or something. So render function. And remember, all this does, all components do is they essentially just return some HTML. So inside here, since we're going to want a heading 1 and heading 2, then I'm going to need to wrap those in a div. And now we'll just put heading 1, and I'll say will be name. And again, this is where we're going to want to replace. This is going to be equal to something like avatar, Good Will Hunting. It's going to be different every time we use this component. But for right now, I'll just hit that as placeholder. And why are you not copying? All right, so for heading 2, we'll just write the genre. And just so we make sure that everything is working up to this point, let me just go ahead and render one of these components right here. So if I go ahead and refresh this, all right, our component is looking good. But of course, we don't just want this in here. We want custom properties. So instead of just using your component like this, you can actually add attributes to it. Just like you have attributes right here, and they're equal to some value, you can do that in your own custom components as well. So in this movie component, let me just say title. And for the title, I can set this equal to anything I want. So for this first one, I'll just say avatar. So this is what's going to display right here. Now, after this, let me just go ahead and give it a genre. So again, these properties can be named anything you want. Title, genre, favorite food, pudding, whatever. So I'll say, what is avatar? An action movie? All right, there you go. So now what we did is we made this component and we passed in two properties, a title property and a genre property. So now how do we say where to display them? Well, you display them by writing curly braces. Now, any of your properties you can access through this dot props. So if we want to access the title, we write this dot props dot title. Whenever we want to access the genre, write this dot props dot genre, just like that. Now, if I refresh this, check it out. Now it says avatar action. So this is the coolest part about properties, and I'll show you guys this right here. Actually, it may be easier if I do this. Put it on a new line. All right. So say that we want to display 3 different movies. We wanted to display Avatar and what's another movie? The Notebook. And the genre of the Notebook is romance. And what's another movie? Captain America. Then what we can do is we can render 3 different components, and each of these components have different properties. So check this out. Every time I render one, instead of just having some static text in here, it actually gets the title of whatever the component is in the genre right here. So again, a property is essentially an HTML attribute that we can pass in to customize our components in different kinds of ways. Pretty awesome, eh? Nice. I'll see you guys next time. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back. And in this video, I am going to show you guys how to use event handling with React. So say that you had this component and your component has some buttons on it. Of course, whenever the user click one of those buttons, you would want to be able to handle that event, or in other words, just do something, depending on what the button said. So that's what I'm going to be showing you guys how to do, aka event handling. So in the upcoming tutorials, I'm going to start making a very simple app to kind of demonstrate a bunch of stuff. And I think it's a little bit easier to see how all of these, concepts are put together in a simple project instead of just showing you guys a bunch of weird demos. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making kind of a sticky note app where the user can add new notes or delete or edit notes. And I don't know, they can write whatever notes they want, like walk the dog, have a note for their favorite movies, just pretty much a bunch of comments that they can edit, delete. I don't know. It's the first thing that popped into my head. So let's go ahead and make a new component and I'll name it comment. Now, all this is going to be is essentially a block that's going to have some text on it, depending whatever your comment is. And we'll have a button for editing it and another button for deleting it. So very simple. So React, create class. All right. So of course, the very first thing I do whenever I make a component is no matter how many different features I want to add to it, no matter how interactive it's going to be, I just go ahead and I make the plain HTML, and then I just add dummy data. So maybe this is a component that has a photo that changes all the time. Well, when I first make it, I'm just going to put in some image, just some static image, just to make sure that it works and is displayed how I want it to. So for render, remember, this is just going to be equal to a function, and it's just going to return some HTML. So I actually have a bunch of the CSS already styled. So you can style this however you want. This isn't really a CSS tutorial, but if you want the same styling as me, then go ahead in the first video, get that repo downloaded, and the CSS file is right here. So there you go. But again, if you don't have the CSS, then just style it however you want it to look. So this entire thing is going to be in a div, and I already made a style called comment container. So for the class name, you set this equal to comment container, just like that. Now that brings me to another point, and that is this right here. You can add attributes just like you would in normal HTML using JSX. However, the reason that we can't write class right here is because class is already a reserved keyword in JavaScript. A JavaScript class actually means something. So that's why in JSX, we have to write class name. So most of your other attributes are going to be fine, just write normal HTML. But sometimes if they clash with JavaScript, then that's what JSX did. And I'll keep a heads up in case I come across it again. But anyways, inside this comment, what we're going to have is basically a div and 2 buttons. So the div is just going to be the text of whatever. We'll put for whatever and 2 buttons. All right, so this first button is just going to be for editing the comment, and this second one is just going to be for deleting. Actually, let me just go ahead and name that remove. All right, now I already styled these as well. So the text actually has a class name of, pretty creative, wait till you hear it, comment text. And all the styling does is it makes it a little bit bold, and it adds some spacing between the text and the buttons. That's all. And these button classes, I already styled these as well. So I made a class called button primary, which is blue, and another one that is red called button danger. So now our edit button is blue and our remove button is red. Thought that was kind of appropriate. All right. So what we want to happen is whenever the user clicks these buttons, then something happens. So before we can add an onClick attribute, we actually need to make functions, because essentially we're going to say whenever you click this, call a function in this component. Now we already have this function right here called render, and this is a function responsible for drawing or displaying some HTML. Well, we can actually make our own custom functions and name them whatever we want. So I'm going to make one called edit, and again, this is just equal to a function. Now, this can do whatever we want. We can log something out on the screen. We can just make some alert pop up. And for right now, keep things simple. We're just making an alert pop up that says edit name comment. Now we're going to make another function. And eventually, whenever we call these functions, we're going to be able to edit the comment and it's actually going to delete it. But for right now, I'll just say remove. We'll just make an alert pop up to show you guys that, hey, you can actually have event handling with your components. So right now we have these cool functions, an edit function and a remove function. And whenever you call them, they display a pop-up that says editing or removing comment. But we didn't link these buttons to these functions in any kind of way. So how do we do that? How do we say whenever we click this button to call this function or this function? Well, what you do is you actually add another onClick attribute. Now this is going to be equal to this function. So whenever we click edit, it's going to call onClick, call this function. So how do you do that? Well, since this is a function from the same class, we just need to write this and then a dot separator and then the function name. So whenever we click the edit button, just call this class's or components edit function, just like that. Now, the same thing with a remove. Whenever you click the on or remove button, just go ahead and call this component's remove function or method, I guess it's more technically called. So there you go. And now we actually need to render this. So let me clean this up so it's nice and neat for future tutorials. All right. So I'm taking all these comments and I'm surrounding them inside a board. And all this board is some styling to give it a nice light blue background, as you guys can see right here. So whenever I want to make a new comment, then all I have to write is comment just like that. And let's write hey now and check this out. So whenever I refresh this, we can actually test these right now. If I click edit, we get our alert popping up. Whenever I click remove, we get our another alert popping up. So we know that our event handlers, they are working properly. But again, like I said, one thing I want to do from here is instead of just having the static text, just like this, I actually want to take whatever text is in between these comment tags, and I want to display that for the comment. So let me just write something like, I'll just write a line name is Bucky for one comment, and then for another one, I'll write beans, something stupid, and then for another one, all right, tuna. Just so we have 3 different comments. So right now, whenever I refresh this, to take a look at my application, all of these comments are the same because we just said display text. We didn't say do anything with this. So how do we access the data in between these tags so we can actually use it in our component? Well, this is actually a built-in property called children. So again, the children property is just any data that's in between the opening tag and closing tag. So remember that I said in like 2 tutorials ago, whenever you want to use properties, you just use this props and then the name of the property. And this one is just children. So whenever I refresh this, check it out. It gets whatever is in between these tags, which are the children, which is a static text in this example. And for each component render, it displays it in between this div tag. So I know I threw a lot at you guys, but again, what we covered in this video is first of all, event handling. Now, event handling, I can't even talk right now, is how you can pretty much make custom functions in your component, and you can call those with onClick, and there are other event handlers as well, but onClick is the most famous one. And also, whenever you want to pass data in between these tags, you can access it through the children property. So pretty cool, eh? And yeah, I think that's it. That's enough info for this lesson. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys next time. Alrighty guys, welcome back. And in this video, I want to talk to you about state. Now, state is pretty much a way that you can customize a component. And if you guys are thinking, wait a minute, we already can do that with properties, there is one big difference between properties and states of your component, and that is states, they can change. So I know I didn't mention this whenever we were talking about properties, but whenever you give your component a custom property, whenever you create it, it's set for life. So for example, say that you have this button component and you passed in a property to make the background color green. Well, that button is going to be green for the rest of its life. Now, say that you wanted to make a button that could change colors every time the user hovered over it. Well, you couldn't use properties for that because properties, their values can't change. Whenever you have a value that needs changing on your component, you need to use state. It sounds confusing, but it's actually really easy. You can customize your component using properties or states. Whenever something is going to say the same, use properties. Whenever it changes, use states. All right, fantastic. So let's go ahead and make one using states. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a component called checkbox, because whenever you have a checkbox, it can either be checked or unchecked. So what we're going to allow the user to do is click that, and then we'll have a bit of text that changes. It says, hey, you checked it, hey, you unchecked it, hey, you checked it, hey, you unchecked it. So since that bit of text is going to change, that's why I decided to use state instead of property. So it's going to name it checkbox and set it equal to React, create class. All right. So I guess, first of all, we can just go ahead and render out the basic kind of structure of it. So again, like I said, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a checkbox, and then under it, I'll have that bit of text that says, hey, it's checked, hey, it's unchecked. So pretty much 2 different pieces to it. So for the message, which is pretty much just going to be equal to checked or unchecked, I'll just go ahead and do this. MSG, and now I need an if statement. So the way you access states are pretty much the same as properties, except instead of props, you just use state. So this state, and later on, we'll make one called a checked. And we're going to say that this can either be equal to true or false. And I'll show you guys how to actually set that in just a second. So if it is checked, then this message, we're just going to say equal to checked. And then we'll say else, message is unchecked. All right, so there is our basic logic right here. And before we go further in creating this component and actually rendering out any HTML, I want to build another function right here to show you guys how to set the initial value of your state. So there's a built-in function, and it's called get initial state. So whenever you call this function, was it going to auto-populate for me? Come on, mate. Let's do it. All right. So this is a function that you can use, and its job is to basically set up the initial state of your component. And this is actually why it wasn't auto-populating. All right. So what this does is it returns an object of your states. Now, we're only going to have one state in here, and that is checked. Now, you can set this equal to true or false to start with. It really doesn't matter. I'm just going to set this equal to true because I feel like it. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up where whenever this is true, then that means that the user has a checkbox checked. If it's false, then it means that they didn't check it. So it's good for like filling out forms and stuff like that. All right, so right now we have one state checked and it's equal to true. And if you want to add another one called like bacon and set it equal to 32, you can. You can add as many states as you want. It doesn't matter. So now that we have a state variable, what we can do now is actually return some HTML. So return, and this is going to be in multiple lines. So I need that. And all right. So again, like I said, we're going to have a checkbox and then just some text below it. So since we're going to have multiple elements, we need to wrap them inside a parent div. Now for your input, the type of this is going to be checkbox. Now, how should I set this up? All right, we're just going to make it really basic at first, just so we make sure that something is displaying on the screen. And then later on, I'll show you guys the cool stuff. So this is going to be the checkbox, and it's a valid checkbox right now. Now beneath it, I'll say checkbox is, and then this will either say checked or unchecked. Now, in order to do that, all we need to do is we need to output this variable, which is MSG. So MSG, boom, roasted, there you go. Now to actually render this, I just throw it in my render function, and let me go ahead and refresh this and check it out. So right now it says checkbox is checked. Now, why does it say that? Well, because we didn't add any logic really. We just went ahead and we rendered this component, and the initial state of checked is equal to true. So then whenever it rendered, it said, all right, if this is checked, which it was, then the MSG, which is the message, set it equal to check. So it says checkbox is checked. And again, if this was false, then this would say checkbox is unchecked. Just like that. So we got our state working properly, but now we have to actually add the brains to make it work correctly. So let me change it back to true. And what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to say, all right, you see how whenever we load this page for the very first time, the default behavior of HTML and Chrome is to have these checkboxes unchecked. Well, we can actually overwrite that, and there's a built-in value called a default checked. So this is essentially equal to true or false. You can set it equal to whatever you want, and you can actually just type it in. But what we want to set it equal to is the state of this checkbox, whether it's checked or unchecked or true or false. So how do we do that? Well, we need to access that state variable by this state checked. So again, if this is true, then it's going to say true right here, and it's going to be checked, which it should be just like that. If it was false, then it would be unchecked, which is pretty much the default behavior anyways, but you might as well have control over it. So we got this taken care of. Now we have one other bit of logic to work out, and that is we want to say whenever the user clicks this area right here, then we want this message to change. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we already learned in the last video how to work with event handlers. Now, instead of onClicked, which you may think it would be called, it's actually onChanged, and that gets called whenever the user clicks this, whether they check it or uncheck it. So I'm going to write onChange right here. Whenever the user clicks that checkbox, what do we want to call? Well, we're going to have to build a function in just a second, but for right now, we'll just say handle checked. And again, we didn't build this yet, but we'll build it right now. So again, whenever the user clicks this, we're going to call a function called handle check. Now again, that's equal to a function separated with the comma and all right. So what do we want to do whenever they check the checkbox? Well, all we want to do is we want to pretty much set the state of the checked, which is either true or false. We don't know. We want to set it equal to the opposite of what it was before. So I say that because if it's checked and they clicked it, then we want to set false. If it already is false and they check it, then we want to set it equal to true. So we pretty much change it from whatever it is. Now, a really cool way that we can do that is this. Whenever you want to change the state of a component variable, then all you have to do is call this set state. Now, this takes an object, and just like this, you can pretty much set it to whatever you want. So we can just go ahead and set the state equal to false or true or anything like that. But instead of just passing it in a value, we just want to get the current value of checked and make it the opposite. So how do we do this? Well, we already know how to get the state by using the state.checked. And in order to flip it or give the opposite, we just write exclamation mark in front of it. Basically, the symbol above a 1. All right. So what this is going to do, again, whenever we click this, is it's going to get the current state of the checkbox. Is it checked or not? Is it's going to set the new state equal to the opposite of it. That's it. So now let's go ahead and refresh this and check it out. It now toggles unchecked and checked, unchecked and checked. Boom, 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 boom. Now, this is another important thing that I want to point out. You see, right here, all we did is we set the state. All right, but why does it automatically re-render? I mean, usually in most programs, you would have to be like, all right, so we're going to change the state, and then we need to explicitly tell React, all right, now we have to redraw this piece of the DOM, this piece of the web page. But the cool thing about React in components is you don't need to explicitly say whenever your state changes to redraw a certain part of your web page. It automatically watches for your states and where they can change. And whenever your state changes, that part of the web page gets redrawn automatically to fit that. So all we have to do is we worry about changing states, and all the rest of the hardware gets taken care of for us. So look at this. We now got a custom part of this component that can change. So by default, it's checked. And whenever we uncheck it and check it again, it redraws or changes. Pretty sweet, huh? So again, just to sum things up, state is a lot like property. But whenever you use property, you can't change it like we're doing right here. So whenever you just want to set a background color or maybe throw someone's name in there and it's going to be that for the entire lifetime of the component, then use properties. Whenever you have part of your component that changes, in this example, this bit of text right here, then use state. Boom roasted. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back. And now that we understand the concept of state, what I want to do is apply it to my little note program. So basically, I want to have state because these little notes, they're going to have basically 2 different modes. So the first mode is the one you see right now, is just normal mode. And it means that you're not editing it. You pretty much just have a chunk of text that you're looking at. So this is kind of the default mode. Now, another mode I want to have is editing mode. In other words, whenever the user clicks this edit button, instead of just having static text right here, I want to display a form where they can edit the comment or write a new comment or whatever. So basically, I'm going to have these notes switch between 2 different modes or states, editing or normal. So how do I do that? Well, remember, whenever we want to use state, the first thing we need is that get initial state function. So this function pretty much just sets the initial state. Now, by default, I'm going to have these out of editing mode because whenever the user first loads this web page, we don't want a bunch of forms popping up. We just want, the default text. So I'm going to have one state, like I said. Make sure I spell it right, editing. And the default state, the editing state for all notes is just false. This just means normal mode, just display the text right here. All right. So actually, I can get rid of these alerts right here. And all right, I might as well fix these. So now let's go ahead and think about this logic a little bit. So the first thing is whenever the user clicks this edit button, then this edit callback is called. So what do we want to do in terms of state? Well, whenever they click the edit button, we probably want to set editing to true instead of false, obviously. So this set state, remember, this is just equal to basically your states, just like this, but now we want to set it equal to true. All right. So what can we do? Remove, we won't even worry about that right now. And actually, let me go ahead, instead of having an alert, I just want to log this out because I just don't like those alerts popping up. They're annoying. And all right, so check this out. In normal mode, we can go ahead and hit edit, but then whenever they're in editing mode, we don't want to have the edit button still there because they're already editing. So instead of these buttons, we're going to have another button that says save. So whenever they're editing and they're done, they can hit save, and it's going to pretty much save the text. So we need one more function. Then it's going to be a lot like this. And this is just going to be called save. And all save is going to do is, for the moment, is just going to set editing equal to false. So whenever you're done editing, hit save, and it's going to take you out of editing mode. All right, simple enough. So now what we're going to do is this. You see right here, we have one function called render. Now, render always returns this version of the note right here. But what we essentially want to do is we want to say, okay, we don't just always display this HTML. You have to decide if you're in editing mode or not. If you're in normal mode, then go ahead and display this. But if you're in editing mode, then you actually want to display a form so the user can edit the text instead. So how do we do that? Well, what we can do is we can actually make two different functions, and I'll call them render form and render normal. So basically, two different types of HTML, and then we'll choose between them. So I'll say render normal function, and again, all this is going to do is basically this. Actually, I can go ahead and cut that. All right. So whenever we call render normal, it's just going to display this right like this. Now we also want another one called render form. So what do we want to change of this? Let me actually think about this for a second. All right. So instead of this div, we actually want a text area. All right. So for the text area, we want to give it the default text of whatever the comment is, because whenever they're editing it, they want the text in there. So in order to do that, all we have to do is say default value and set it equal to, where is it? This.prof.setChildren. So again, instead of having the text display in here, it will just display in the form. And all right, that was good. Now, instead of these buttons, edit and remove, we actually just want a save button. So it's going to say save, and I'll say change that to green instead of blue. Now on click, whenever you're in editing mode, instead of editing it again, because you're already in editing mode, you actually just want to save your text. So we're going to call save, and then it's going to change your mode to normal mode, take you out of editing mode. Boom, roasted, you're good to go. So, all right, that looks pretty good for right now. Now, the last thing I want to do is this. You see, these are just custom functions right here. We actually didn't even call them yet. Whenever we actually use the component, it always looks for this function called render. So inside here, we just have to write a little bit of logic, and it's just going to say, if you are in editing mode, display this. If not, display this. Easiest thing you've ever done in your life. So I'll say if the state is editing, so if this state editing, then what we want to do is return this dot render form. So if they are editing the note, then display the form so they can edit it. Else, just display normal. So return this render normal. All right, looking good, mate, looking good. So now let me go ahead and refresh this. All right, now check this out. Whenever I hit edit, it changes from normal to render form. And it also puts editing mode, sets the state of editing equal to true. So right now, the state of editing is equal to true. Now, whenever I hit save, look what's going to happen. It's going to set the state of editing equal to false. And the logic is whenever that's false, it's just going to render normal. So return it back to normal. Same thing with any of these. And you can even do 2 at a time. It doesn't matter. So do you want to put them in editing mode? If so, it's going to give you a form. If not, it's going to put you back in normal. And if you want to change the default of it, then you can right here. But I mean, this is pretty good right now. So we got the displays taken care of. However, we have one issue still. Whenever the user actually edits the note and hits save, it doesn't actually change the text because we didn't write that logic anywhere. So that's what we're going to be working on in the upcoming tutorials. And yeah, we now know a whole lot about states. Looking good. And yeah, see you guys next time. Alrighty guys, welcome back. And in this video, I want to talk to you guys about refs. Now, before I explain exactly what refs are, let me go ahead and talk you guys through exactly what we're going to be doing. So essentially, whenever the user edits these comments, we want to allow them to pretty much type some new comment in here and hit save, and then it's going to save it right here. So this action is actually broken up into 2 parts in our code. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get the value of whatever they typed in, and that is kind of step 1, and we do that whenever they hit save. And step 2 is going to be taking that value and setting it equal to this chunk of text right there. So in this tutorial, we're actually just going to take care of part number 1, which is getting the value of whatever they typed in. So let's think about how to do this for a second before we just jump right into it. So whenever they hit edit, this text area pops up, which is this right here. And then they throw some text in here, whatever their weird comment is, and then we have to get the value of it. So we pretty much need a way to reference this text area so we can get the value of the text that they type. So let's think about this. I mean, I guess you can give it an ID, right? Well, wait a minute. That won't work because if we have multiple components, multiple different nodes, they can't all have the same ID. So can we just say like this component's text area? Well, that won't work either because we can actually have multiple text areas. And what if we have a component with like 3 different text areas? So, all right, how do we solve this problem? Well, the solution is to use refs. Now, refs are a way that you can get a reference to one of your child elements. So whenever you need to refer to the text area's value, which is text they typed in, we need to give it a ref. So how do we do that? Well, right after text area, you add a new attribute called ref. Now you can give this anything you want, and I'll just say new text. So now when we refer to the new text ref, it knows that it's talking about this element right here. And again, the reason that this is better than ID is because if you render all these with the same ID, it won't work because you can only have a unique ID. In other words, all of your different components have to have a different ID. So now what we can do is, now that we have a way to reference it, let's go ahead and in our save function, let's actually utilize that. So what I'm going to be doing is whatever they typed in, I'm just going to be storing it in a variable, and I'm just going to name it val for value. So this is going to be equal to whatever text they typed in this example, distances. And how do we get access to it? Well, you first need to say this dot refs dot new text. We just copy that. Too lazy to type 5 more letters. All right. So now this is a reference to this element right here. Now, if we just set it equal to this, then it's actually going to be equal to the whole text area object, and that's not what we want. We actually want the value of this. So again, the value of this is actually going to be equal to whatever they typed inside, which is in this case, bacon. So now we got bacon stored in this variable val. Now remember I said eventually what we're going to want to do is set this equal to this text right here. But for this tutorial, since I just want to cover refs, let's just go ahead and log it out on the screen. So console log, and I might as well add new comment bow, right like that. So whenever we hit save, what it's going to do is it's going to get the value of this, and then it's going to log out new comment bacon, new comment hey now, or whatever. So everything was good. Let me refresh this. And all right, so I know you guys probably can't see in my console, but I'm going to hit edit. And then instead of hi, my name is Bucky, I'll say this equal to bacon, smakin, and then I'll hit save. And then it logs out new comment, bacon, smakin. Actually, it looks like smackin', but whatevs, yo. All right. So that sums up what I wanted to cover in this tutorial, and that is whenever we need a reference to one of the child elements that get rendered out, instead of giving it an ID, we can give it a ref. And then in our code, whenever we want to refer to that element, we just call this refs, and then whatever we named that ref. And then we can do whatever we want with it. In this case, we got the value of whatever these are typed in to the text area and logged it out in the console. So yeah, there's part 1 to saving these comments, and part 2 is a little bit more tricky, but we'll get there. So thank you guys for watching. I will smell you later. Alrighty, houses, welcome back. And in this video, what I want to do is I want to show you guys how to properly use multiple child elements. So right now, up to this point, we've been developing this program where we can kind of edit comments, and we're going to be able to remove comments, and we can kind of keep going with the, techniques that we've been using. But I'm going to tell you guys right now, in a few tutorials, we're going to run into a problem, and that's this. What happens whenever we want to do stuff like rearrange these nodes, put them in a different order? What happens when we want to just have more control over them? Well, this is a thing. Right now, we have a bunch of independent comments. This is a comment, this is a comment, and this is a comment. Now, even though we can set properties and states on them, we learn all about that, they still are independent. In other words, they don't know about each other. So this comment, hi, my name is Bucky, it doesn't even know that this comment exists. There's no way that they're connected. So whenever we try to do stuff like rearrange these, since they don't have an idea of each other's existence, it's going to be really difficult for them to change order. They only exist in their own universe. So in order to have more control over them as a whole, instead of just individual comments, we need to pretty much surround it in a parent container, or just think of that like a manager where you can kind of manage all the pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up a board component, and you can think of the board component as this blue surrounding container right here. Now, this board component is going to be made up of all of these comments, and since we set it up that way, it's going to be aware of every single one, and they can move them around, change their order, delete them, remove them, and it's a much better system than just having a bunch of standalone objects. So let's go ahead and do that in order to make another component. Let me just minimize that so it's a little bit easier to see. So here's my comments right here. You can make as many comments as you want. And I'm only going to make one called board. So I'm going to have one board, and we can stick, a dozen comments in there, 3, however many we want. So in order to make a new board, just go React, create class, stick this as an object. Now, this is another thing that I'm going to do. I'm actually going to have an array in here, and this array is essentially going to be equal to each comment. So again, in this board, we're pretty much going to be able to reference each individual comment and manage them all in that kind of way. So let me iterate get initial state. Be sure I write that correctly. And this is going to be a function. And again, all this is going to do is it's going to return an array of comments. So again, you can have as many states as you want, but I'm only going to be, making a really simple example. So there I go. And let me just add 3 different comments. So I'll say, I like bacon. Want to get ice cream. Why do I always think about food? I think something's wrong with me. And I'll say, okay, we have enough comments now. All right. So our initial state is essentially just an array with 3 strings of text. So remember, whenever we actually make a comment component, all we do is we just use comment, and then we put a string of text right here. So it's going to be really easy. So now let's go ahead and actually make those. Now, whenever we make it, remember we have to use the render function. So the render function, and again, if you have multiple functions, you need to separate them with a comma. This is going to be responsible for returning whatever HTML that we want to draw. So the first thing I'm going to do is, since this is on multiple lines, surrounded with parentheses, is I'm going to make a div that's going to represent this entire board. And actually, what I can do is actually just take this and copy it right here. So this is the HTML that it's going to return. And now, whenever I render, I just have to write board like that, and it returns this. So the class name is board. And instead of just having these comments, I actually want to make comments based on this array. So I pretty much have to take this array, loop through it, and for each item in it, I want to stick it inside a comment right like here. So I'll delete this. I'll do it the long way. All right. So what I'm going to do is, in order to do that in JavaScript, if you aren't familiar with mapping, we first need a reference to this comments array. Now remember, it's a state. It's not a property. And the reason it's a state is because it's going to change. So this state, and then you write the name of it, which is comments. And then what we can do with JavaScript is we can actually call a function called map. Now, whenever you use map, what you can do is you can throw in a function in here, and it will call it for each element in the array. So whatever function we write right here, it's going to call it on this one, and then this one, and then this one. Now, the arguments for this function, or parameters, are item, I. So again, like I said, this map function is going to take this array, and it's going to loop through it. And for each item, it's going to treat the text as an item. And I can actually change that to text. That might be a little bit easier. And for the counter, it's going to be equal to I. So 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, tomato, tomato. So for each of these iterations, what I want to do is just create a new comment. So I just want to return, and remember, sure, got that capitalized, comments. Now, whenever we make a comment, all we do is we add the text in between, and now we're good to go. So this is going to work just fine. However, here is the one issue that we have. Right now, we're just creating a bunch of comments, but we still don't have any really unique way to identify each one. The reason that we set up this new kind of architecture is because we wanted this board to kind of be a manager for all of the comments. So in order to have control over these comments, we need to give them a unique identifier. Now, the main way that you kind of do this is you actually use a key. So in React, a key is a way that you can uniquely identify each child. And you can actually give it an ID or ID number or whatever you want, but this is kind of the standard way. And we'll take a look at a couple tricky things later, but for right now, there you go. So again, we made a board, and all this board did is it took an array, and for each item in the array, it generated a comment. So now this board, it actually owns all of these comments. Pretty cool, huh? So now if I refresh this, we can see I like biking, want to get ice cream. Okay, we have comments now. I like bacon, want to get ice cream. Okay, we have comments now. So essentially, it's the exact same result as before, but now, even though the user doesn't really realize it, we now have a lot more control over the items or comments in our program. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back. And in this video, what I want to do is I want to show you guys how to edit and remove comments. Now, just to give you guys a real quick reminder of the status of our application. Right now, we can click this edit button, and it will take us to this new kind of view. And we can change the text, but when we hit save, it doesn't actually save it. So we got the kind of interface changes working, but none of the kind of brains behind it. And also this remove button, it doesn't do anything. So we can hit remove, and let's actually see what it does. Yeah, it just logs out something in the console. So they don't perform as expected. So that's what we're going to be taking care of in this tutorial. So before I get to the actual comment component, I just want to go ahead and take care of the board component because we have to do some work on it. So the very first thing I'm going to do is actually just clean up this render function, because in this render function, as we saw in the last video, what we did is we essentially looped through this array, and for each item in the array, we created a new comment from it. And we did so using this anonymous function, aka a function with no name. So let's just go ahead and clean that up and just make a named function from it. And I'll just write each comment. So I'm actually just going to set this equal to this right here. And I'm way too lazy to type it again. So set equal to that. And boom, roasted. There I go. So now I can tighten this up since it's all on one line. And remember, inside this map function right here, we still need to pass in a callback. So we'll just write pretty much a reference to this function, but now it has a name, and we can reference it by calling this each comment. So right now, we really didn't change anything other than just clean up the code. And if we refresh this, we can see that it's the exact same. Now remember, it's going to call this function each time it renders each component or creates a new comment. So I'm actually going to make a couple changes to here. And how do I want to do this? All right. You can break this up so it's a little bit easier to see. And put these on new lines because I'm going to be introducing a few more concepts. So in the last video, I said that essentially every time you make a new comment, you need a way to uniquely identify it. And we did so through this key right here. Well, the truth is, a key is, like I said, a unique identifier, but it's really for React. It's not really for programmers. So whenever you want to keep track of each new comment, what you can do is you can actually just add another index and set this equal to the same thing. So this I right here is just going to be the increment for your array. So 0, 1, 2, 3. However, instead of messing with React stuff, we're just going to set an index. And then when we say get comment 0, it gets this one. Whenever we get comment 2, it gets this one. So we're pretty much going to be using the index and leaving the key kind of out of it. So a couple other things I want to mention is this. You know that whenever you use properties, a property basically allows you to pass data to the child component. So now we can, pass bacon and throw some data in here, and then it's going to give a bacon property to comment. So why do I say that? Well, right now we have each comment with its own unique index, but we also want to pass in a property of a callback function. So whenever we pass properties or data to child components, they don't just have to be strings or numbers or kind of static data. You can actually pass in entire functions. Kind of weird, but check this out. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to pass in a callback function to delete and edit these comments. So how is it going to know which one to delete? Well, it's going to know via the index. So I'll show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. First, we're going to have to make a new function on this board to remove a comment. So I'll just write remove comment. And all this is going to do is it's going to be a function, my housekeeping crap taken care of. Now, what information do we need whenever we remove a comment? Well, all we're going to require is the index of the array. So we're going to pass in the index. And if this is equal to 0, it's going to delete the first one. If this is equal to 2, it's going to delete the third one, so on and so forth. So now let's just shadow log something out. All right, console log. Let me just print it out in case we have any bugs or we can see what's going on. And I'll say removing comments I. All right, so whenever we remove a comment, if we want to look in the log, it'll say removing comment 0 or whatever. So now what we need to do is actually remove it from the array. So we first need a reference to this array. And if I just copy this, kind of cheat a little bit here. So I'm going to make a variable and just name it ARR. You can name it whatever you want. And it's equal to this state comments. Now, this is the thing. Whenever we want to remove an item from the array in JavaScript, what we can do is we can actually splice the array. Now, this is kind of weird because here, let me go ahead and write it. It's probably going to be a lot easier to understand. All right, actually, let me show you guys what just popped up. So whenever we use the splice function, it takes a number and a start. So essentially what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, how many items do you want to remove and where do you want to start at? Well, we just want to start at whatever item we throw in. So if we said I equals this, then start there. And since we only want to remove one comment instead of like the 5 comments after it, then we just throw ahead 1 right there. So now what this is going to do is pretty much give you a new array stored in ARR with that comment removed. So there's probably, a more convenient way to do it, but now you understand kind of the details behind it. All right, so check this out. This is still the state of the comment. We didn't change this at all. We just made kind of a copy of it. So once we made a copy of this, we popped off one of the items. So now the last thing we have to do is actually take our state and set it equal to this new array, the updated array. So how do we do this? Well, if you guys remember, anytime you want to change a state, you just write set state, and then you pass in your state objects that you want to change. So ours was named comments, and you don't need to write this.state.comments because it already knows that you're working with this component state from there. And the new value of comments, which is just ARR. So again, one last time, we made a copy of this array. We popped off whatever item we passed in, and then we pretty much set the new array equal to the updated array. Boom roasted, easy peasy, beautiful, clever girl. So this is what we're going to call, essentially, whenever the user clicks this button right here. Pretty cool, eh? So now the next thing I have to do is we need to make an update function. So that takes care of the remove button, but now we have to take care of this edit button right here. So essentially, whenever they hit edit, make a new comment and hit save, then this function is going to be called that I'm about to say right now. So I just write update comments, and this is going to be a function as well. And it's kind of going to work the same with a few changes. So let me go ahead and, all right. So we can't just throw in an index right here because whenever we update a comment, we actually need the text as well. So we're going to update a comment. So set this text equal to this item in the array. So instead of just I'll just write like new text and I. So we basically pass in something like Bucky is awesome, and it's going to set Bucky is awesome equal to like the 0th array element. That's it. So I'll say updating comments. I won't even give anything there. Updating comment. Keep it real, nice, and simple. All right. So after this, we, of course, need a reference to the comments again. So boom roasted, there you go. And now, instead of just popping an item off, we want to get a reference to that specific array item. So array I, in this case, it would be the 0th one, or the first one. And then all we do is we set this equal to the new text, whatever the user typed in. So there you go. And last but not least, you pretty much take the current array and we update it. So it's now referencing the new array. So that's all we do whenever we want to edit any of the comments in this list. All right. Actually, let me think. All right. So before I let you guys go, I am going to, you know what? I think that this is good for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'll show you guys how the heck this comment component actually calls these functions since they're in an entirely different component. It's a really cool trick, so I'll see you guys then. All right, check this out, sauerkraut. So in the last video, what we did is we made these functions to essentially remove comments. We can call this function whenever we need to edit a comment and give it a new text and the array item. So now all we have to do, piece of cake, is whenever we click these buttons, hook them up to these functions. All right, so the buttons were in this comment. So essentially whenever I click save right here, I want to call, whoa, wait a minute. Oh, crap. We got a little problem here. So check this out. You see, this button right here, all of these buttons, they belong to the comment component. However, the functions that we want to use are in the board component. So how the heck are we supposed to call these functions from an entirely different component? Well, the answer, my friend, is to use properties. Properties? I thought that was for like customizing a component. Well, check this out. It's really cool. Whenever you use properties, what you can do is instead of just passing numbers and strings to comment, you can actually pass entire functions. So in other words, we can have a property that's equal to this entire function. Pretty sweet, eh? So in the comment, whenever we make one, let's just go ahead and add a new property. And just to show you guys that it's different, let's say the first thing we want to do is we want to pass in this function right here. So I'll call property update comment text, and you can name it whatever you want. And this is going to be equal to this dot update comment. So again, later on, whenever we run this program, comment is now going to have a property called update comment text. And this is going to be equal to this function, its owners or the board's function. Pretty sweet, eh? So now the last thing we have to do is just make it for this comment right here so we can actually delete the comments. So I'll just say make a new property called delete from board. And this is going to be equal to this dot remove comment. All right, so whenever we create a comment, what information do we need to give it? You need to give it a key, an index. We're going to throw it this function and also throw it in this function. And of course, the text, so it has some text to display right there. All right, so now that we got that taken care of, let's go ahead and back up to our comment component and hook these up. So we already have event handlers for editing, removing, and saving. Again, edit is whenever you click this. Save is whenever you click this, and remove is whenever you click this right here. So we got all the hard work taken care of. And actually, a lot of this stuff we're just going to keep in. For example, the editing, we're also going to change that to true, false. We're just going to kind of include two more things. So let me just go ahead and take care of remove first. So in other words, whenever we click the remove button on this comment, then what are we going to want to do? Well, we're going to want to call this dot props. And remember, we passed in, let me make sure I don't copy this wrong. We passed in a property called delete from board. Now this delete from board is equal to this function right here. So we have to remember whenever we use this property, we also need to pass in the index. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So whenever we call this dot props delete from board, we also need to pass in the index of this comment. How do we do that? Well, it's easy. Since we already passed the index in as a property, we call this dot props dot index. Pretty cool way. So that is the way that you can pass in an index, which is an ID number. You can pass in a function from the owner or the parent, and then it can pass that back up to the parent. So there you go. And where's my other one? Edit. This is for editing and saving right here. So same thing with save. And I can probably, let me get rid of this and tighten all this up so it's a little bit more compact. All right. So whenever the user leaves a comment like my name is Bucky and they hit save, then what do we want to do? Well, all we want to do is we want to call this dot props, and I forgot the function name already. Update comment text. Now remember, whenever we use this, then it requires the new text and the position in the array. So this dot props update comment text. Now the new text is equal to val, and actually we don't even need that variable since we're only using it once. So we can actually just use it like that. And the index is this. So this is the new text, and this is the ID of the comment. Boom roasted, there you go. So now I think everything should be working correctly. So let me go ahead and refresh this. And I won't pull my logs out because we'll see if it works. All right. So I like bacon. Let me go ahead and change this to my name is Bucky and hit save and check it out. Pretty sweet, eh? Now, if I want to get ice cream, I hit remove and it deletes it. How stinking awesome is that? So just to kind of recap and give you guys a real quick overview so this kind of sticks in your brain. Whenever you have information and you want to pass them to a child component, you can use properties. Now, a property can be something simple, just like a number, as we saw right here, or if you want to take one of these functions and allow the child to use it, you can actually just pass the entire function in as a property. And again, you can name these properties whatever you want. You can name it bacon and it'll work. It really doesn't matter. Now, since you do that, the child will now have access to the parent function via a property. And remember, whenever you use these functions, just make sure to get your parameters correct since they never really auto-populate. So there you go. That is how you pass data to children and how you can also pass data back up to the parent using functions. So now we got everything working beautifully. And yeah, I'm going to go admire this for a second. And in the next video, I'll show you guys how to add new comments. It's actually really simple. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I will smell ya next time. Alrighty, hosses. So now that we got our edit functionality and remove functionality working correctly, the last thing I want to do is I would just want to add a quick button to add a new comment. So let me go ahead and in my board, let's just go ahead and add it right above the board. So since we're going to add a button and still have this board, we actually need to wrap those both inside one parent div. So let me stick my board back in there and let me just put button. All right. So on the button, I'll just write add new. So we'll have a button right at the top, and whenever the user clicks it, it'll just give them like a blank one, or maybe we'll add some default text in there. Who knows? And I already have some styling go in, so I'll say class name. I'm gonna make it purple, so that's button info. Again, this isn't any React stuff. It's just to make it look kind of fancy. And great. So again, this just makes a purple button, and I can actually render this out right now. All right, so there you go. When you click it, nothing happens. Plain old dumb button. So what else do I want to do? What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove all of these by default. So at first, we're actually not even going to have any comments whatsoever. So whenever the user wants a new one, they're going to have to click this button. All right. So might be a good idea right now is that make a function to add a new comment. Why not name it add? So function, boom, roasted. Now, actually, whenever I do this, I'm going to add some default text in there. So we just all have blank comments or else they'll look kind of weird. And yeah, so this is going to be the text that we're going to set essentially to this array item. So just like before, what we're going to be doing is pretty much taking a string of text and adding it to this array. So we need a reference to this array. We're going to make a copy of it. And then for that copy, we're just going to add a new item. So push is how you add a new item to an array in JavaScript. And what text do we want to use? Just this right here. So the very first time we call this, it's going to have a string of text in here that says like, I love Bucky or I love ice cream sandwiches, whatever. And just like before, since we need to update the state, then we're going to update the common state using the new array. Boom, roasted. How easy was that? So now the last bit of code we have to write is we have this function right here. Now we actually just have to hook it up to this button. So how do we do that? Well, over in our button, what we do is we just write on click. Hey, how it does that. On click, just like that, and set it equal to this dot add. Now, one other thing I want to mention is this. Whenever you call it in this kind of way, since JavaScript can't really figure out scope yet, you need to call bind. So this is actually how you pass values or text in right here. So what we're going to combine is just a no object, and the default text is pretty much the text that's going to appear on the button. So I'll write, or let me write something that's like bacon gyro, and I'll spell it wrong. Why not? So basically, whatever you type here is going to be the default text. And of course, the user can edit that later. So let me refresh this, add new, and there you go. There's our default text. I just didn't want to write default text because I want to show you guys that you can like customize it. It's default text. Let's do it properly now. All right, so you add it. We now have a new array item, aka a new comment, and the user can edit this. Bacon, they can add a few more. Tuna fish. And you know what? I actually didn't even want this one, so I can go ahead and remove that. Boom, roasted. There you go. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is probably all I'm going to do for this little note program. There's a lot more React tutorials that I'm going to cover, but they're going to be set up a little bit differently. And for example, you guys probably noticed already that is getting kind of cluttered having all this code inside one file. So later on, I'm going to show you guys how you can actually take each component, break it up into a single file, and then whenever you run your final build to build your entire program, it kind of bundles everything up automatically and makes it run super fast. So that's what we'll do in the next couple of tutorials. It's going to be awesome. So I'll see you guys then.